one of the big international stories of the week that has emanated from the United States and war-torn Ukraine. US President Joe Biden is currently on a tour of Europe, and he will attend the NATO summit in the Lithuanian capital on Wednesday. Top of the agenda will be the Ukraine war. Significantly, Biden has already made it clear that while full NATO support to Ukraine's war effort against Putin will continue, NATO membership for Ukraine is not on the table, as it would mean war with Russia. At the same time, Biden has defended his controversial decision to supply cluster bombs to Ukraine. Why is there a furor, an international furor, over this decision? What are cluster bombs, and why are they banned in over 100 countries? Let's take a deep dive into this. The decision by the United States to supply Ukraine with cluster bombs has caused concern among key US allies. Italy, Spain, Germany and the UK are among the NATO members who have expressed opposition to the use of these weapons. Now, cluster bombs have been banned by over 100 countries due to the significant risk they pose to civilian populations. These munitions release smaller bomblets that have a high failure rate, leaving many unexploded remnants that can remain dangerous for years to come and may detonate unpredictably. The US claims these bombs are necessary as Ukraine's weapon stocks are diminishing. President Joe Biden has confirmed the decision to send cluster bombs to Ukraine as part of a military aid package worth $800 million. Biden acknowledged that US allies may be uncomfortable, but this was a difficult decision to make, and he insists that Ukraine needs this ammunition. He also said that he had discussed this matter with US allies before arriving at the decision. Let's understand this. Cluster bombs are a method of dispersing large numbers of tiny bomblets from a rocket, missile or artillery shell that scatters them in mid-flight over a wide area. They are intended to explode on impact, but a significant proportion are duds. What does that mean? This means they don't explode initially. This happens especially if they land on wet or soft ground. They can then explode at a later date on being picked up or stepped on, killing or maiming the victim. From a military perspective, these bombs can be horribly effective when used against dug-in ground troops in trenches and fortified positions, rendering large areas too dangerous to move around in until carefully cleared. So, why are these bombs banned? More than 100 countries, including the UK, France and Germany, have signed an international treaty, the Convention on Cluster Munitions, that outlaws the use or stockpiling of these weapons due to their indiscriminate effect on civilian populations. Children are particularly prone to injury, as the bomblets can resemble small toys left in a residential area or a farmland and are often picked up out of curiosity. Children might handle them and suffer injuries or even fatalities. Human rights groups have described cluster bombs as abhorrent and even a war crime. Some bomblets fail to detonate immediately, as we said, leaving behind unexploded ordnance that can harm or kill people for years to come. According to the International Committee of the Red Cross, the submunition failure rate, referred to as the dud rate, has varied from 10 to 40% in recent conflicts. Now, both Russia and Ukraine have been using cluster munitions since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. Neither have signed the treaty banning these cluster bombs, nor has the United States, even though it has previously criticized Russia's extensive use of this weapon. Russian cluster munitions reportedly have a dud rate that's as high as 40%, meaning large numbers remain a hazard on the ground, whereas the average dud rate is believed to be close to 20%. The Pentagon says its own cluster bomblets have a dud rate of less than 3%. Now, why does Ukraine say that it needs cluster bombs? Ukrainian forces are running desperately low on artillery shells, largely because, like the Russians, they use them up at an extraordinarily high rate, and Ukraine's Western allies cannot replace them at the speed at which they're needed. Artillery has become a key weapon as the Ukrainians now face the daunting task of trying to dislodge the Russian troops from their well-dug-in defensive positions stretched along a 1,000-kilometer battlefront. In the absence of enough artillery shells, Ukraine has asked the United States to restock its supplies of cluster munitions to target the Russian infantry manning all those defensive trenches. Now, some experts say that by using cluster bombs to suppress enemy fire from these trenches, Ukrainian forces could gain precious time to help them clear their way through Russian minefields. But others say there is no need for cluster bombs, as different types of conventional weapons could do the same job just as well. This decision by Washington is deeply unpopular with many Democrats and human rights advocates. The debate has been going on for more than 6 months now. What impact could this US decision have? Critics argue this will take away much of the moral ground that Washington enjoys in this war. While Russia's numerous alleged war crimes are well documented, this move is likely to draw accusations of American hypocrisy. The move will inevitably place the United States at odds with some of its Western allies, and any perceived split in that alliance could work to Russian President Vladimir Putin's advantage. As we said, the UK, Canada, New Zealand and Spain have already said they're opposed to the use of these weapons. Germany, on the other hand, a signatory to the Convention on Cluster Munitions, has said while it would not provide such weapons to Ukraine, it understands the American position. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense minister has given assurances that cluster bombs would only be used to break through enemy defense lines and not in urban areas, not against civilian population. Biden's move will bypass the US law prohibiting the production, use or transfer of cluster munitions with a failure rate of more than 1%. Russia's defense ministry has described this move by the US as an act of desperation and evidence of impotence in the face of the failure of the much publicized Ukrainian counter-offensive. Russian President Vladimir Putin has previously accused the US and its allies of fighting an expanding proxy war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, on the other hand, has thanked the US president for what he called a timely, broad and much-needed military aid package. But clearly, the ethics of using cluster bombs will continue to be debated. Well, that's all the time we have on Global Lens on News9 Live. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow.
He thought he could outlast us. And 1 year later, the evidence is right here in this room.